It began with a man who thought his heart had closed for good, and a woman with nothing left but 2 shivering daughters and the courage to knock on fate's forgotten door. What unfolded in that broken-down shed was not just survival. It was the beginning of a miracle that would come full circle. Years later, if stories of quiet resilience and love born from kindness move, you take a moment to subscribe. These are the stories we tell, because sometimes the smallest act changes everything. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The wind howled through the Montana Valley like an old, tired song that only Sam Whitaker still remembered. Snow dusted the empty fields outside, coating the cracked fence posts and bare trees like powdered sugar on forgotten gingerbread. Winter had settled in early this year, and it seemed determined to stay inside the small cabin. Everything had its place. The woodpile was stacked by the door. The coffee mug, chipped on the rim, but still sturdy, sat beside the old kettle. A faded photograph of a woman with smiling eyes and soft curls rested on the mantel. Sam looked at it now as he laced up his boots, the leather worn but cared for, like everything else in his life. Another cold one, he muttered, to no one, pulling his coat tight and stepping out into the wind. His breath rose in clouds. The morning light was thin gray and unforgiving. He headed to the shed out back. It wasn't much, a lean-to built decades ago by his father. It had held tools, bags of grain, and once, long ago, a litter of puppies his daughter had begged him to keep. That was before the accident, before everything had gone silent. The snow crunched underfoot as he approached the door. Something felt off. The latch, which he always locked from the outside, was slightly ajar. Frowning, Sam reached for the handle. The metal was cold against his skin. He pushed the door open slowly. What he saw stopped him cold. There, nestled against a stack of hay, lay a woman. Young, thin, her coat more patches than fabric. Her arms were wrapped tightly around 2 little girls, no more than 5 or 6, curled up like kittens under an old army blanket. The woman's hair clung to her forehead in damp strands. One child had her thumb in her mouth, cheeks, sunken face pale. The other clutched a stuffed rabbit with only one ear. Sam's first instinct was fear. He wasn't used to people, strangers especially. But as he stood there, the fear gave way to something else, something older, deeper. A memory of his wife pressing a warm mug of soup into his hands during a blizzard. The way his daughter once left her gloves behind, so a homeless man could have them. The way his mother used to say, kindness is its own kind of shelter, Sammy. He cleared his throat gently. The woman stirred, blinking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, trying to rise. "We didn't mean to trespass. We'll leave, just needed a place out of the wind." Her voice cracked at the end. She was trying to sound strong. Sam could see the way her knees wobbled. She hadn't eaten in days. The girls hadn't either. That much was clear. "Wait," he said, raising a hand. "Don't move. Just stay right there." He turned on his heel and strode back toward the house. Not looking back. He wasn't good with words, never had been, but he could heat a kettle. Inside, he ladled the leftover chicken soup from last night into a pot and lit the stove. It was his mother's recipe, simple and hearty. Carrots, potatoes, garlic and bone broth, a pinch of thyme. He added an extra splash of milk this time. 10 minutes later, he returned to the shed with a tray, 3 steaming bowls, a flask of water, and a wool blanket. The woman was sitting up now, the children huddled close to her sides. Sam set the tray down without a word. The girls looked at the bowls like they'd forgotten what food smelled like. "I don't have much," he said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it's warm." The woman looked at him, eyes shining with more than just exhaustion. gratitude, maybe even disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. The girls reached for the bowls. One of them took a bite and made a tiny sound. Half sigh, half sob. "It tastes like heaven," she murmured. Sam didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded and stepped back, letting the moment settle like snow. "What's your name?" he asked after a pause. "Grace," the woman replied. "And these are Lily and June." Sam gave a small nod. "I'm Sam. Whitaker." Grace reached for his hand, not to shake it, but just to touch it. Just enough to let him know they were real. And so was he. By mid-morning, the Montana sky had faded from steel gray to pale silver. Snow drifted lazily down in soft spirals, covering the ground in a new coat that muffled sound and softened the world. Inside the small farmhouse, warmth had begun to return, not just in the temperature, but in the way the air felt, less hollow, less still. Sam stood in the kitchen watching through the window as Grace helped her daughters out of the shed. The girls wore coats that didn't match too thin for the weather, but they smiled as they clung to their mother's hands. Their cheeks, now touched with color, looked almost healthy. He turned back to the kettle, poured hot water into 3 mugs, and stirred in a spoonful of powdered cocoa for each. The good stuff, the kind he'd been saving for company that never came. Grace entered first, holding the door gently, as if she didn't want to disturb something fragile. Sam had already laid out a stack of towels, a pile of socks, and a clean flannel shirt that used to belong to his daughter. She would have been just about Grace's size. He thought that shirt hadn't been touched in years. The twins walked in hesitantly, glancing around with wide eyes. Lily, the more outgoing of the two, pointed at the mounted antlers above the fireplace. "Is that from a moose deer?" Sam replied with a faint smile. "Big one." June quieter clung to her sister and buried half her face in her scarf. Grace ushered them toward the couch, then turned to Sam. "We really didn't mean to intrude," she said. The truck broke down 6 miles back. We tried walking to town, but the girls were too tired. I saw your shed, and I thought it was just a place to hide from the wind." Sam nodded slowly. "Well, you found more than wind out there." Grace laughed softly, but her voice cracked in the middle. "Yeah, we did." He handed her a mug, cocoa. "You didn't have to." I know, he cut in gently. "But I did." She took the cup with both hands, holding it like something sacred. She inhaled the scent before taking a sip, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she looked less like a stranger and more like someone who had been here all along. The girls sipped in silence, their legs tucked under a heavy quilt. They hadn't said much, but they kept glancing at Sam when they thought he wasn't looking, like they were trying to figure out if he was real. Grace looked down into her cup. "I had a job at a hospital in Billings, CNA work. Then my husband left, took the car, took the money, left us with nothing but a broken truck and hope. Hope runs out faster than fuel." Sam listened. He didn't interrupt. He understood more than he could say. "My girls deserve better," she added. "I've been trying so hard to give them something better," but her voice trembled. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." "No," Sam said softly. "It never is." There was a long silence, not uncomfortable, but full-weighted. Then one of the girls, Lily, pointed at the fridge. "Do you live here all by yourself?" Sam nodded. "Where's your wife?" she asked innocently. Sam's jaw tightened a little. Grace opened her mouth to redirect, but Sam raised a hand. "She passed," he said plainly. "A while ago." The little girl's eyes dropped. "I'm sorry." Sam gave her a small smile. "Me too, sweetheart." Another beat passed. Sam stepped back toward the kitchen, instinct guiding his hands to the pantry. "You planning on getting back to Billings?" Grace hesitated. "I don't know. I don't think we can get the truck running again. I was going to walk to town, ask around. Maybe find a shelter." "There's no shelter in town," he said, shaking his head. "Not in the winter. Closest one's 40 miles away." Grace's face fell slightly. Sam didn't look at her, but he could feel the weight of her exhaustion press against the room. "Well," he said after a moment, "I've got a spare room. It's not fancy, but it's warm. If you need a couple nights to figure things out, you're welcome." Grace blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said again. Softer this time, "but I'm offering." She looked at him, eyes searching his face like she was reading something between the wrinkles. What she found must have been enough, because she nodded. "Okay, just a night or two." "All right," then he said, reaching for his toolbox. "You all settle in. I'll go take a look at that truck." Grace smiled, not with joy, but with something just as rare. Trust, as Sam stepped back outside the cold, bit through his coat, but he barely felt it. Something warmer had taken root. He didn't know what it meant yet, or where it might lead. But he knew this much. The shed was no longer empty, and neither was he. The following morning brought a muted sun filtered through low, gauzy clouds. Outside, the snow had slowed to a dusting, but the wind still whispered through the eaves of the house, like a ghost reluctant to leave. Inside it was warm. Sam stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. He didn't usually make breakfast soups. Too many memories of sitting alone at the table with leftovers and silence. But this morning felt different. He'd found a half bag of egg noodles in the pantry, chopped carrots and celery, and used the last of his frozen chicken. The smell reminded him of something long buried Sundays from a life he no longer lived. At the kitchen table, Grace sat with Lily and June, their cheeks pink from sleep and warmth. June, still shy, rested her head on her mother's shoulder, while Lily tapped a spoon against her cup, humming softly under her breath. The sound filled the house in a way that music hadn't in years. Sam placed 3 steaming bowls on the table and sat across from them, folding his large hands awkwardly in his lap. "You cook like my Grandma Lily announced," scooping a mouthful and blowing on it with a dramatic puff. "That's so," Sam said, raising an eyebrow. "She made soup every morning," Lily continued. "Even when it was sunny. She said it made your heart warm." "Well," Sam replied with a soft chuckle. "Your grandma sounds like a wise woman." Grace smiled as she helped June with her spoon. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. For all of this, Sam gave a quiet nod. Words had never been his strength. Doing that was what he understood. Fixing fences, cutting wood, making meals, saying less, showing more. After breakfast, Sam pulled on his coat and gloves. "I'll head out and see what's what with your truck," he said. "Might be salvageable." Grace looked up. "Are you sure? Got nothing but time," he said, managing a faint smile. Out in the driveway, the pickup looked worse in daylight. Hood dented windshield, cracked back tires, nearly bald. Sam popped the hood, wincing at the tangled belts and rusted clamps. It would take more than a wrench and hope to get it running again. But he'd try. He owed them that much. Back inside, Grace gathered dishes, while the girls played on the living room rug with a set of old wooden blocks. Sam had kept from when his daughter was small. Sam returned an hour later, hands black with grease. "How bad is it?" Grace asked, as she dried her hands on a towel. Sam leaned against the doorframe, starter shot. "Radiator's leaking. You'd need a mechanic, and a couple $100 worth of parts. At least." Grace's shoulders sagged. "That's what I thought." "You're welcome to stay a little longer," he offered, "until we figure something out." Her eyes met his. There was a question in them unsaid but loud. "Don't owe me anything," he added quickly. "It's just, I've got space, you need it." Grace nodded slowly. "Just until I can make a plan." Later that afternoon, the girls helped Sam bring in firewood from the porch. Lily tried to carry a full log, nearly toppled under the weight, and laughed so hard she dropped it at Sam's feet. "You've got spirit," Sam said, ruffling her hair. "She thinks she's a lumberjack," Grace teased from the doorway. "Am not." Lily shouted, hands on her hips. "Are too, June," whispered, giggling behind her hand. That night, they ate simple stew by the fire. Sam's specialty, though he never called it that. Grace helped slice onions and shared stories about her time as a CNA old veterans, who told the same jokes, nurses who danced in the halls to cheer each other up. Sam listened, amused by how animated her eyes became when she talked about caring for people. She was quieter when she talked about leaving it all behind. When the girls were finally tucked into the guest bed under 2 thick quilts, and Sam's old flannel shirts rolled into makeshift pillows. Grace lingered by the fire. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't found us," she said softly. "I didn't find you," Sam replied, staring into the flames. "You found me." She looked over at him, head tilted. "I mean, this place has been quiet for a long time," he added. "Too long. You brought noise back, and I didn't realize how much I missed it." Grace smiled faintly. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The room fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. After a while, she stood. "Good night, Sam. Good night. Grace." When the door to the guest room clicked shut, Sam remained by the hearth. He stared into the glowing embers, lost in the memory of his daughter's voice. His wife's laugh, the way the house used to feel. It didn't feel like that anymore. It felt warmer. By the 4th day, the snow had begun to melt in earnest. Narrow streams of water trickled off the roof, pattering gently against the tin buckets Sam had left out to collect them. It was the kind of day that hinted at change, without promising anything. A day that smelled of wet pine and old hope. Inside the house, Sam chopped carrots at the kitchen counter, while Lily and June colored at the table, their voices soft and companionable. Grace stood by the sink, drying dishes with a towel, humming an old hymn under her breath. It almost felt like a family, and that Sam realized with an uncomfortable twist in his chest was dangerous territory. The illusion cracked that afternoon. A neighbor, Jean Matthews, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, who ran the feed store in town, came by to drop off a bag of cracked corn for Sam's hens. She hadn't been invited in, but she let herself through the gate anyway, as she always did. Sam met her on the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, mourning Jean. She squinted past him toward the sound of laughter drifting through the screen door. "You've got company," Sam nodded, "just helping someone out for a few days." Jean raised an eyebrow. "Someone, a woman and her 2 girls." Sam replied. "Their truck broke down near the property." Jean crossed her arms. "You don't know them?" "Don't need to," he said simply. "You always were a soft touch," she muttered, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "You be careful, Sam. You've got a good heart. But that's how folks get taken advantage of." He held her gaze. "Sometimes folks just need help." June didn't press further. She handed him the corn and left with a parting warning to keep your door locked just in case. When Sam returned inside, Grace was sitting stiffly on the couch, her jaw tight. She had clearly overheard enough. "I'll pack our things tonight," she said, without looking at him. "We'll be out in the morning." Sam blinked. What she stood brushing invisible lint off her sweater. "We've stayed too long, and your neighbors are noticing Grace. Thank you for everything, really. but I don't want to be the reason people start whispering about you." Sam stepped forward, frustration stirring in his chest. "Let them whisper," she shook her head. "It's not about pride. It's about safety for you, for the girls, for me." The room fell silent, filled only by the quiet ticking of the old clock above the mantel. Sam sighed. "If you really want to go, I won't stop you, but you don't have to." Grace didn't reply. She walked down the hall, closing the guest room door behind her with a soft click. That night dinner was quiet. The girl sensed the tension but didn't understand it. June leaned against Grace's arm, while Lily picked at her stew lips pressed tight. After the dishes were done and the girls were asleep, Sam sat by the fire alone. He stared at the flames, remembering another time, another silence, when his daughter had come home from school in tears, because someone had laughed at her hand-me-down clothes. His wife had wrapped her in a blanket made hot cocoa and whispered, "We don't live by their approval, sweetheart. We live by our kindness." Kindness. That was what had brought Grace here, what had brought him back to himself. He stood and walked down the hall. The guest room door was slightly ajar. Inside, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, folding one of Sam's flannel shirts. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. She looked up, startled. He hesitated in the doorway. "You're not a burden?" Grace gave a tight smile. "Maybe. But I still feel like one." Sam stepped into the room, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know, when I lost my wife, I thought the world had ended. I kept going, but it was like breathing through mud. Every day was just about surviving. The next." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening, but these last few days he looked down at the worn carpet. It felt like living again. She exhaled slowly, me too. Silence stretched between them, soft, not strained. "I don't know where we're going," Grace admitted. "I'm just so tired of starting over." "Then maybe," Sam said quietly, "you don't have to." "Not yet." Her eyes filled. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "I'll understand if you still want to go," he added. "But you're welcome to stay. As long as you need." She nodded once slowly. The next morning, when Sam stepped into the kitchen, he found a folded piece of paper on the counter. It was torn from the back of a grocery list pad and written in soft, looping handwriting. "Thank you for giving us more than shelter. Thank you for giving us peace. Grace." Beside it sat the flannel shirt she'd folded and a small pair of knitted mittens. The house was quiet. Sam walked out to the porch, expecting to see them gone. Instead, he saw Grace and the girls in the shed, gathering their things and laughing. They hadn't left after all, and somehow that mattered more than anything they'd said. The smell of rising bread filled the house like a hymn sung quietly in the background of a Sunday morning. It started when Lily asked if they could make cookies. Sam had gone to the pantry and realized he was low on sugar, but he said, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully, "I've got flour, yeast, salt, and just enough honey." Grace had tilted her head. "Bread." Then Sam shrugged. "Haven't baked in years. But I remember the recipe." What he didn't say was that it was his wife's recipe, written on a yellowed index card tucked behind the spice rack. He hadn't touched it in a decade. He could barely read her handwriting anymore, but his fingers still remembered the rhythm. Warm water, a pinch of salt, a spoon of sugar, and patience. Now, as the dough rose in the warmth of the kitchen, the girls sat at the table, their cheeks dusted with flour, arguing about whether they were allowed to name the loaf. "I think we should call it Fluffy," Lily insisted, arms crossed. June frowned. "You can't name bread." "That's weird. Says you." Lily shot back. "You named your shoes." Grace, standing at the counter, chuckled and nudged Sam. "This is what peace sounds like." He smiled without turning. It's been a while. They worked quietly together, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Grace rolled out the dough for a second loaf, while Sam preheated the oven. Their shoulders brushed once, and neither of them moved away. Later that morning, while the bread baked, Sam and the girls went outside to shovel the walkway. The snow was melting faster now. Leaving behind patches of muddy earth, Lily turned the chore into a game, tossing snowballs at June, who shrieked and ran behind Sam's legs. "Hey, now," he warned, playfully brushing snow off his coat. "This ain't a battlefield." June giggled. "You're the snow shield." Sam raised his shovel like a knight's sword. "Then I shall defend you, Lady June." Grace watched from the porch, arms folded, smiling. The sun lit her face, softening the tired lines around her eyes. For a moment, she didn't look like a woman who had lost everything. She looked like someone finding her way back. When the bread came out of the oven, the smell was almost too much to bear. Sam sliced the first loaf, carefully. Steam curling upward like a blessing. He spread butter on thick slices and handed them out one by one. The girls took their pieces reverently, biting in and humming in delight. "Fluffy is perfect," Lily declared, mouthful. Sam chuckled. "I'll take your word for it." Grace took her slice last. She didn't eat it right away. Instead, she held it in her hands, looking at it as if it held more than flour and yeast. "My grandmother used to bake bread every Saturday," she said. "I haven't smelled this in years." Sam looked at her, then at the bread, then back. "Funny how scent brings things back." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes I feel like I've forgotten what home smells like." But today, her voice trailed off. Sam didn't press. He didn't need to. That afternoon, they cleaned the shed together. It had become something of a second room, a playroom for the girls, a quiet space for Grace. They swept the floor, repaired a broken window, and hung up old quilts for insulation. At one point, Grace found a small wooden box tucked behind a loose plank. She opened it to find a pair of antique salt and pepper shakers shaped like birds. "Were these yours?" she asked Sam. He stepped closer, then shook his head. "They were my daughter's. She collected things like that." Grace didn't ask more. She simply cleaned them with a cloth, then placed them gently on the kitchen windowsill. That evening after the girls went to bed, Grace stayed up in the kitchen, flipping through an old cookbook Sam had pulled from the cabinet. It was worn, pages stained with butter and ink. "You have a lot of good things here," she said softly. "Things that matter." Sam leaned against the counter. "I used to think none of it did. Not without someone to share it with." She looked up. Their eyes met across the dim kitchen. "Sam," she said quietly, "I need you to know this hasn't been just kindness. This has been healing for all three of us." He swallowed hard. "You've given something back, too." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He didn't answer right away, just nodded toward the kitchen table where the bread had cooled, where crayons lay scattered beside empty cocoa mugs, where the air no longer echoed. "You brought life back into this place," he said idly. "I didn't even realize it had left." Grace looked down, blinking away tears. "I'm not saying you should stay forever," he added gently. "But you're welcome too." "As long as you want." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Grace reached for the cookbook, gently closed it, and said, "Then I guess I'll need to learn your wife's pot roast recipe." And just like that, something unnamed settled between them. Not a promise, but something even stronger. A beginning. The days had grown longer. Not by much, just a few extra minutes of pale light at dusk, but enough for Sam to notice enough to make him linger on the porch after feeding the chickens, watching the horizon bleed slowly from gray to lavender. Grace was in the kitchen, helping Lily and June fold clean laundry. One of the girls dropped a sock, then another. Laughter spilled from the open window, soft and familiar. It danced in the air, mingled with the scent of soap and wood smoke. Sam sipped his coffee lukewarm now, but he didn't mind. Some things were better with time. Still, something inside him felt unsettled. Not wrong exactly, just restless. He'd begun to memorize their rhythms, the way June clung to her mother's sleeve when nervous, the way Lily insisted on carrying more firewood than she could handle, the way Grace hummed while she swept never the same tune, but always in the same quiet key. It was dangerous. He thought how easily these little pieces had fit into the shape of his days. Too easy. That night, while the girls colored at the table, Grace stood beside the stove stirring stew. She wore one of Sam's flannel shirts, too big on her frame. Sleeves rolled up, collar open at the throat. He hadn't said anything when she started borrowing his clothes. It felt oddly natural, like leaving a lamp on in an empty room. "How long has it been since you worked at the hospital?" he asked, breaking the quiet. Grace looked up. "Almost a year." "Now I left when things started unraveling. I was scared the girls would come home to an empty house." He nodded. "You ever think about going back?" Her brow furrowed. "Sometimes I miss helping people. The feeling of doing something that mattered. It still matters," Sam said. She glanced at him. "What does what you do now for them, for this place?" His voice was low, uncertain. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's not the same." He didn't argue because he understood. Sometimes even good things didn't feel like enough, not when you'd lost too much. The next morning while Sam was splitting wood, Grace came out holding an envelope. Her expression was unreadable. "This came in today's mail," she said. He wiped his hands, took it. The envelope was thin, addressed to Grace L. Merritt in careful print. "It's from the Regional Health Center in Bozeman," she said, quietly. Sam looked at her. "I applied a while back," she explained. "Didn't think I'd hear anything, but they're offering a full-time position. CNA work. Decent pay. Housing included." Sam felt something twist in his chest. "That's good news," he managed. Grace nodded. "It is." He waited for her to say more. She didn't. That night, the house was quieter than usual. The girls sensed something was different, though neither asked Grace, packed in small gestures, folding the girls' clothes tighter, gathering shampoo into Ziploc bags. Sam didn't offer help. He didn't know how. Instead, he sat in the living room, staring at the cold fireplace. Shadows flickered on the walls, echoing memories he didn't want to revisit. After the girls were asleep, Grace joined him. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, sat on the floor beside his chair. The silence stretched out like a bridge between them, sturdy but too far to cross. "I don't want to go," she said, finally. He looked down at her, heart pounding. "Then don't. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because this isn't mine," she whispered. "This house, this life, it's yours, and I don't know where I fit in." Sam leaned forward. "You think I know where I fit in anymore? You think I've got it figured out?" Grace gave a small, sad laugh. "I lost everything." "Grace," he said, "my wife, my daughter, my sense of what a day's supposed to feel like. And then you showed up, unexpected, uninvited, and suddenly this place didn't echo anymore." Her eyes met his. "But I'm scared," he admitted, voice breaking. "Because if I care, really care, and you leave anyway, I don't know if I can do it again." Grace reached up, placed a hand over his. "I'm scared too." They sat like that for a long time. And then, slowly she stood. "I need to think. Just a few days." to figure out what's best for all of us." Sam nodded, not because he agreed, but because he loved her enough not to stop her. The day they left the house held its breath. Grace didn't say goodbye with dramatic words or lingering embraces. She simply hugged Sam at the bottom of the steps, whispered, "Thank you," against the collar of his shirt, and helped Lily and June into the borrowed sedan parked beside the woodshed. Sam had fixed the engine over the last 2 days, more from instinct than intent. Now it purred quietly, ready for the road Grace thought she needed to take. The girls waved through the back window. Sam raised a hand, but his feet wouldn't move. Then they were gone. And just like that, the quiet returned. But it wasn't the same. Quiet Sam had lived with for years. It wasn't the peaceful solitude he once mistook for comfort. This quiet pressed against his ribs like something sharp. It reminded him in 100 small ways that life had once filled this space, and now it didn't. That afternoon, Sam wandered the house without purpose. The kitchen still smelled faintly of Grace's rosemary biscuits. The couch still had a child's mitten wedged between the cushions. A crayon drawing 3 stick figures holding hands remained magnet-pinned to the fridge. Above it, in a child's blocky handwriting, "Us and Mr. Sam." He stood there a long while, one hand on the fridge handle, heart aching in a way he hadn't let himself feel in years. He tried to keep busy, chopped firewood, mended a section of fence, repaired a leaking gutter on the shed, but everything he did felt hollow, like acting out someone else's life. That night he lit the fireplace and poured himself a cup of tea. Not cocoa, that was for company, for laughter, for warmth. Tea was for silence. The wind whistled under the eaves again, the way it used to before. Grace, before the girls, before their voices had echoed down the hallway like music. He missed them. God, he missed them, and he hated himself a little for how quickly he'd grown used to having them there. He spent the next few days pretending things were normal, but the house told a different story. The guest room sat untouched, except for the folded flannel shirt Grace had left on the pillow. The girls' boots, which had been too muddy to pack, sat by the back door. The dish towel still had faint stains from Lily's bread-making attempts. On the 4th morning, Sam opened the shed. It smelled like cold wood and emptiness. He stared at the straw-lined floor where they'd first appeared. He remembered the way Grace had looked up at him, exhausted, desperate, proud. He remembered the girls' small hands clutching at each other in sleep. He remembered how everything had changed with one act of kindness. He sat down on the overturned crate they'd used as a makeshift bench and let the silence settle around him. And then he cried. Not the choked-back tears he'd hidden after his wife died. Not the quiet ache he'd numbed with work and time. These were open, raw tears, the kind that carved new space in a man's soul. He cried for the years lost, for the hope he hadn't dared to feel, for the love he might have let slip through his fingers. And when the tears finally stopped, he didn't feel empty. He felt awake. The next day, a storm rolled in, unexpected and fierce. Rain pounded the roof with wild fists, wind bent the trees, the sky turned the color of old bruises. Sam rushed to cover the woodpile, secure the barn doors, and reinforce the windows. Then came the flash. Lightning struck with a crack that split the sky. Sam turned just in time to see the bolt hit the edge of his workshop. The structure lit up like dry paper flames, licking skyward before he could even scream. He ran. Water slicked the grass under his boots. Smoke stung his eyes. He tried the hose, but the water line had frozen again. He grabbed buckets, filled them from the rain. Barrels hurled them at the flames, but it was useless. Within minutes, the workshop, the heart of his craft, his livelihood, his memory of purpose was gone. He stood in the rain, panting, soaked to the skin, watching his world collapse in orange and ash. Neighbors arrived too late. They stood back, solemn, offering blankets, and murmured condolences. Someone asked, "You got insurance?" He nodded, but his voice was hoarse. Not enough. The wind howled louder that night than it had in months. The next morning, Sam walked through the charred remains. Tools melted beyond recognition. Blueprints turned to ash. A lifetime of work reduced to smoke and silence. He walked back to the porch, sat on the top step. The house was behind him. The shed stood to the side, still intact, and ahead of him, only the flat gray stretch of a Montana sky. For the first time in years, Sam didn't know what to do next. But deep in his chest, beneath the grief and soot, was something stubborn. A flicker, a memory, a pair of small hands wrapped around a bowl of soup. A woman's voice saying, "This has been healing." For all three of us. He didn't have answers. He didn't have plans. But he still had that. And maybe that was enough. For now. 2 days after the fire, the snow returned. Soft and heavy, it blanketed the blackened ruins of Sam's workshop, in silence, covering the jagged remains like a merciful curtain. From the porch, Sam watched it fall, steaming cup of coffee in his hand. Knees still aching from the frantic effort to save what had already been lost. He hadn't slept much since every creak of the house sounded louder. Every shadow near the shed brought a flicker of old memory. He told himself he would rebuild, that he'd start over again, but the will hadn't come. Not yet. He was just finishing his second cup of coffee when he heard it, a sound so small he thought he imagined it. At first, the crunch of boots in fresh snow. He set the mug down slowly. Stood. Walked to the window. There, through the gray veil of falling flakes, came a shape he hadn't dared to dream would return. Grace. Her coat was heavier than before, navy wool tied at the waist. Her hair was longer, pulled back into a loose braid, but it was her. No doubt. And behind her, trudging through the snow in thick scarves and oversized hats, were two small figures dragging a red wagon behind them, the wheels half buried. Sam's heart forgot how to beat. He stepped onto the porch just as Grace reached the steps. She looked up at him. They didn't speak, not yet. Not with words, because in her eyes was something louder than explanation, determination, softness, apology, and something else. Hope. The girl stopped beside her. June was already waving. Lily was holding the handle of the wagon proudly. Sam squinted, noticing for the first time what was inside. Wood tools, paint cans, a battered lunchbox. He looked at Grace. "You came back," he said, the words dry and unreal on his tongue. She smiled softly. "We heard about the fire, Jean told me." "Of course she did," Sam muttered, but there was no bite in it. "Only gratitude." Grace reached up and touched his sleeve. "I couldn't stop thinking about this place. About you. About how you made us feel safe when we had nothing." She paused, eyes wet despite the cold. "We wanted to come home." That word, home. It settled into him like a stone, in calm water, rippling outward, reaching places he'd kept closed. "You sure?" he asked. His voice cracked. "I've never been more sure." Behind her, Lily cleared her throat. "We brought tools. Mama says we're going to help you rebuild everything." Sam looked down at the wagon again. It wasn't much. A few hammers, a box of nails. But to him, it was the start of a miracle. He knelt in front of them. "I think we've got ourselves a crew." The girls giggled, running up the steps into the house like they had never left. Grace, lingered her breath visible in the air between them. "I left," she said quietly, "but I never stopped wondering if I should have stayed." Sam met her gaze, and now she took a deep breath. "I want to be where we're needed, and right now, I think that's here." He opened the door for her. This time she walked through it without hesitation. Inside the house felt warmer already. The girls were pulling out blankets, talking over each other about where everything had been, what had changed, what they remembered. Grace set the lunchbox on the table, opened it. Inside was a folded cloth, and under it 2 homemade sandwiches, 3 apples and a thermos. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten," she said, simply. Sam chuckled throat tight. "You've always had good timing." They sat at the table together, the 4 of them, like no time had passed at all. The sandwiches were plain peanut butter and honey, but they tasted like belonging. Later that afternoon, Sam led them out to the burned foundation. The air smelled of ash and pine. The snow had started to melt again, revealing the scorched wood and twisted nails. The girls stood in silence, holding each other's hands. "I'm sorry," June whispered. Sam knelt beside her. "Don't be, sweetheart. This is just wood. We can rebuild wood." Grace walked slowly through the charred remains, surveying the shape of what had been. She touched one of the blackened posts. Gently, "I think we start here," she said. "And we build it better." That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, curled on the couch in their pajamas, Sam and Grace sat on the porch again. The stars were visible now, sharp and brilliant in the cold sky. He handed her a cup of cocoa. She smiled. "You remembered. I remember everything." A pause. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I wanted to. Because you showed me what it meant to belong, and I want to give that back." He turned toward her. "What if we don't get it?" "Right," he asked. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then we keep trying," she said. Together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sam didn't feel like a man watching his life happen from the outside. He felt like a man living it. The rebuilding started the very next morning. It wasn't formal. There were no blueprints or budgets, just a shared will, and 4 pairs of hands determined to make something whole again. Sam and Grace began by clearing the last of the charred debris, shoveling out broken boards and twisted nails, hauling wheelbarrows full of ash to the far edge of the property. The girls insisted on helping, though their tiny gloves slipped from their fingers more often than not. Lily swept the porch like a pioneer child, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in pure concentration. June organized a pile of intact nails into a coffee can, humming softly as she worked. "Teamwork makes the dream work," Grace said with a grin, wiping sweat from her brow. Sam raised an eyebrow. "You rid that off a coffee mug bumper sticker," she said proudly. "But it still counts." They laughed, not the awkward, polite kind, but the real kind that fills a space and makes it warmer. It echoed off the shed. Walls bounced through the bare trees and landed somewhere soft inside them both. By the end of the week, the foundation was swept clean and ready for new lumber. Sam went into town for supplies. When he returned, he found Grace and the girls in the kitchen, music playing low from the old radio, the smell of cinnamon wafting through the air. June was kneading dough with her small fists, and Lily was sprinkling flour everywhere, most of it missing the counter. Grace glanced over her shoulder. "Hope you don't mind. We're baking." Sam set down the bags. "You sure this isn't a flour explosion?" "Creative chaos," Grace replied. He watched them for a long moment, the way they moved, the rhythm between them. There was something holy in it, something that didn't need naming. Later that night, when the girls were asleep under a blanket fort in the living room, Sam sat across from Grace at the kitchen table, sorting nails into separate jars. I was thinking, she said, we could use the shed as a start. He looked up for what? A little workshop? Maybe a corner for the girls, a table for crafts, a space that belongs to all of us. Sam smiled. All of us, huh? Grace didn't back down. If you want that, he leaned back, folding his arms. I do, she nodded. Then let's make it real. The next few days passed in a blur of sawdust and shared dinners. Sam taught the girls how to hold a hammer, steady and strong. Grace painted signs for every new shelf they installed. Hope, grit, kindness. One afternoon, she surprised Sam with a small chalkboard hung above the door. In block letters, it read, Whitaker and Company, Aswine 2025. He stood staring at it for a while, throat tight. You don't like it? She asked gently. I love it, he said. Voice quiet. The company part, he realized, wasn't just about work. It was about not being alone. That night after the dishes were done, and the girls were tucked in, Sam stepped outside and found Grace already there, sitting on the porch swing with a wool blanket across her knees. He sat beside her. The stars were clear, cold sharp. She didn't say anything at first, just sipped her tea and listened to the creak of the swing beneath them. Finally, she asked, Do you ever think about starting over? Like really starting over? Not just fixing what burned down, but building something new. He was quiet a long time. I used to think I couldn't, he said. Like I'd be betraying what I lost. My wife, my little girl. That if I moved on, it meant forgetting. Grace turned toward him, and now Sam exhaled. Now I think maybe remembering isn't the same as holding on. Maybe starting again is how we honor what came before. Grace reached for his hand. He let her take it. She held it quietly, thumb brushing over the back of his weathered knuckles. No pressure, no rush, just presence. That was love, he realized. Not a lightning bolt, but a steady fire patiently built, one warm ember at a time. The first sign of spring came not from the ground, but from the air. It was the sound of melting of water, trickling off the eaves of mud, softening beneath boots of birds, testing their voices again after a long silence. The snow was retreating in patches, revealing last autumn's leaves, flattened against the earth like forgotten memories. Inside the workshop, no longer just Sam's, but theirs. Sawdust danced in golden light pouring through the windows. The walls had been repainted. The shelves were full again. And in the center, Sam stood beside a half-finished table, measuring sanding shaping. Not just any table, a table meant for four. The idea had come quietly, like most of the good ones did. One night after a dinner crowded with elbows and laughter, June had said, "We don't all fit here," and Grace had laughed. "You'll have to grow smaller." But Sam had been thinking, watching, measuring the space between chairs, the way Grace always sat slightly angled, giving the girls more room, the way he always ended up leaning back to make space. So he decided no more making room. It was time to make a place. He worked on the table over the course of 3 days. He used pine for the top, soft, warm, with knots that told their own stories. Oak for the legs, a clear finish to let the grain speak for itself. No carvings, no flourishes, just sturdy, honest work, like the family it would serve. On the afternoon he finished it, he asked Grace and the girls to wait outside. Why Lily demanded. "Is it a surprise?" "It's a table," Sam replied, smiling. "Don't get your hopes too high." "You're being mysterious," June accused, narrowing her eyes. "I'm being practical." But they waited anyway. When he finally opened the door, The sunlight streamed in behind them, falling across the tabletop like a benediction. The girls gasped first. "It's huge," Lily said. "It's beautiful," Grace added her voice, lower, steadier. Sam rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought we could use one that fits us all." June ran her fingers along the edge. "It's warm. It's wood." Sam chuckled. "No," she said. "It feels warm." Grace stepped forward. Her fingers joined June's, trailing along the polished surface. "You made this for us," he said. "If that's still what you want." Her eyes found his, and something passed between them, quiet, undeniable. "I want that," she said. That evening they christened the table with a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and laughter. Lily knocked over her water. June dropped a spoon. Grace lit candles anyway. Sam sat at the head watching them all, his heart full, his hands still dusty from sanding. "This feels like a holiday," Grace said, pouring cider into mismatched glasses. "It is," Sam replied. "It's the day we stopped eating on borrowed corners." Later, when the girls were tucked into bed and the candles burned low, Sam lingered in the kitchen. Grace stood by the sink, drying her hands. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, "about permanence." Grace looked at him, waiting. "This house was built for 3. Me, my wife, our daughter. I didn't think it could hold anyone else after they were gone. I thought adding anyone would feel like replacing something that can't be replaced." Grace's eyes softened. "Sam, but then you showed up," he continued, "and you didn't take their place. You filled your own." She stepped closer. Silent. "I don't have a ring," he admitted, "and I don't know if this is the right moment. But I made something. I could offer something solid." He pulled out a small wooden box from his back pocket. Inside, resting on a patch of blue velvet, was a key. Grace blinked. "It's the spare to the front door," he said. "I want you to have it. Not because you need it, but because I want you to know this house is yours too." She opened her mouth, closed it, then smiled through tears. "I don't need a ring," she whispered, "but I think I'll keep the key." Sam reached for her hand. She took it outside. The snow melted a little faster. Inside, something new had just begun to grow. 1 year later, on the first warm morning of spring, Sam opened the shed door and let the sunlight in. It spilled across the floor like honey, warming the wooden planks they had laid together months ago. The space had changed. Gone were the old rusted tools, the drafty corners, the faint scent of hay. In their place stood shelves lined with jars of buttons and bolts, paintbrushes in mason jars, a child-sized work table covered in half-finished crafts, and crayon scrawls. It wasn't just a shed anymore. It was a beginning. Outside. Grace knelt in the garden, her gloved hands gently loosening the soil. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, her braid tucked down the back of her denim shirt. Lily and June darted through the grass, chasing each other with sticks that had magically transformed into fairy wands. Sam watched from the doorway, arms crossed, the quiet in his chest, no longer heavy but full. A bird sang in the nearby tree. The first daffodil had opened beneath the kitchen window. The wind didn't bite anymore. It carried the scent of soil and growing things. Grace stood and waved. "I think the earth's finally forgiven the frost." Sam smiled. "Or maybe it was waiting on you." She walked over, brushing soil from her hands. "The girls want to build a flower box. I told them to ask the boss." He nodded toward the shed. "Tell the crew. I'll draw up some plans." Later that evening, they gathered around the table. Their table. 4 plates. 4 sets of silverware, 4 voices weaving in and out of one another like a song. After dinner, Lily and June curled up on the couch with a book. Sam and Grace stepped onto the porch, mugs of tea warming their hands. Across the field, the sunset bathed the sky in soft oranges and dusky rose. The kind of sky that made you believe something sacred was just behind the clouds, watching quietly. Sam turned toward her. "I was thinking," he said, "about how it started." Grace tilted her head. "Us? No," he chuckled. "The day I found you in the shed." Her eyes softened. "I thought I was rescuing you," he said. "But it turns out I was the one being saved." She reached for his hand, squeezed it gently. "We saved each other." He looked down at their fingers, interlaced, like the edges of something sewn by hand. Uneven, perhaps, but strong. "I still go out there." "Sometimes," he admitted, "just stand in the doorway. Remember what it was before, what it became." Grace's voice was quiet. "Do you miss the silence?" Sam shook his head. "Not even a little." The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of warm pine. And something. Baking, probably the girl's idea of dessert, though it was likely more imagination than recipe. Grace turned toward him. "What do we call this?" "This life." He didn't answer right away, just looked out over the land, the trees, the house that once held sorrow and now held song. "We call it home," he said. And Grace, strong, stubborn, unshakably, kind, nodded as if she had known all along, that night when the dishes were done and the lights turned low. Sam walked out to the shed one more time. The stars blinked above like 1,000 quiet witnesses. He stood in the doorway, now framed with wild ivy and the first hints of blooming lilac. He took a slow breath, filling his lungs with the scent of wood paint, earth, and life. On the far shelf sat the old soup pot, polished, now almost forgotten. It hadn't been used in months, but he didn't move it. It had earned its place. Beside it, pinned to the wall, was a child's drawing. 4 stick figures again. But this time, under the heading, "Our Family." Each had a name: Grace, Sam, Lily June. And underneath, scrawled in orange crayon, and underlined 3 times the word, forever. Sam smiled, stepped inside, and turned on the small light bulb overhead. It flickered, then glowed steadily. The shed, once a place of cold and need, was now filled with warmth and light. Sometimes the hardest winters give way to the gentlest springs, not with fanfare, but with quiet love, steady kindness, and a place set at the table for someone who never expected to be seen. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Feel free to share in the comments we read, everyone. And your presence means more than you know. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories like this, full of hope, second chances, and the quiet power of goodness, you're warmly invited to subscribe and stay with us a little longer. From all of us here, thank you for spending time with this story. Your time, your heart, and your company are truly appreciated.